At the Zabani girls' boarding school, the nights were marked by absolute silence, broken only by the breeze that passed through the tall trees surrounding the school. The savannah in the distance looked like a black sea under the starlight, while the dormitory windows glowed faintly. Among the young women who lived there, few were as intriguing as Ndidi. Her talent for creating magnificent hairstyles was known to everyone, transforming her hair into true works of art. What no one knew, however, was the secret that sustained this perfection. Akachi, her roommate, has always admired Ndidi's elaborate hairstyles. There was something mesmerizing about the way she showed off her detailed braids and always impeccable hair accessories. The other students often asked how she did it, but Ndidi just smiled, offering vague answers or diverting the topic. For Akachi, however, that perfection went beyond human ability. Something about her seemed different, and it was in this restlessness that she fell asleep that night, only to be awakened by something completely unexpected. An eerie sound filled the air, soft and melodic, like singing from a distant place, yet close enough to make your skin crawl. The sound did not seem human, but it carried an indescribable beauty. Akachi tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just her imagination, but the melody became clearer, as if calling her. Her heart raced. It was late, all the students should have been sleeping, but that music didn't come from a dream. She was coming from the other side of the room. With careful steps, Akachi stood up. The cold ground beneath his feet heightened his sense of alertness. Her breathing became faster, and she approached the door that separated the two rooms of the bedroom. He peeked through the crack with fear, but what he saw made his body freeze. Ndidi was sitting in front of her mirror, but something was terribly wrong. His movements were delicate, almost mechanical, but what shocked most was the sight of his head, removed. Ndidi held her own head in her hands as she combed her hair with frightening precision. His eyes were open, as if seeing through the reflection in the mirror, and his lips continued to sing the unearthly melody. The voice did not come from her throat, but seemed to echo from the very air around her. It was both fascinating and terrifying. Akachi wanted to scream, but he couldn't. His body was caught between fear and shock. For a moment, Akachi tried to convince himself that this wasn't real. Maybe it was a dream, a nightmare created by his restless mind. But the glow in Ndidi's eyes, the reflection of the light on the dark, smooth skin of her detached head, it all seemed too real. The young woman looked around, trying to find something that would explain what was happening, but everything around her seemed ordinary, except for the surreal scene before her eyes. Akachi felt the cold floor and the force of his own nails pressing into his palms as he tried not to make any noise. The fear of being seen consumed her. "What is this?" he thought. "Who was this person sharing the same room with me?" She tried to control her breathing, which seemed too loud in her ears, as if even that would give away her presence. Meanwhile, Ndidi continued her graceful movements. The comb ran through the hair as if guided by an invisible force. Tiny, sparkling beads were threaded into place with preternatural precision. And then, as if he had finished his masterpiece, Ndidi paused, closed his eyes for a moment, and with a careful movement, replaced his head. The music stopped, and silence returned like a wave that swallows everything around it. Akachi retreated quickly to her bed, her heart beating so loudly that she feared the sound might be heard by Ndidi. Lying on her side, with her eyes wide open, she didn't dare move. Every detail of that vision remained engraved in his mind, from the melody to Ndidi's calculated gestures. It was as if she was watching something sacred and forbidden, something that should not have been revealed to anyone. As he tried to find explanations for what he had just witnessed, Akachi wondered who, or what, Ndidi really was. The young girl who seemed so perfect and serene during the day was now a frightening enigma. Fear and curiosity began to fight for space in his mind, and Akachi knew that nothing would be the same after that night. She closed her eyes, but sleep seemed impossible. All he could do was wait for dawn, while his mind echoed with the unspoken words and the haunting music that seemed to still vibrate in his ears. Akachi has always been seen as a fearless young woman, someone who faced challenges with a determination rare among students at Zabani's girls' boarding school. Since she was a child, her curiosity was her trademark, often leading her into situations that tested her courage. However, that night, upon witnessing something so incomprehensible, his usual confidence seemed to have disappeared. Her body was still shaking as she tried to organize her thoughts and understand what she had witnessed. Didi, the roommate she admired so much, had revealed herself to be something beyond what human eyes could comprehend. And even with his heart racing, Akachi couldn't ignore the attraction that discovery caused in his mind. Throughout the time they shared a room, Akachi always saw Ndidi as someone almost unreachable. Their intricate hairstyles were so stunning they looked like living works of art. Her colleagues often asked how she managed to create something so perfect without help, but Ndidi responded with an enigmatic smile, leaving a mystery in the air that no one dared to delve into. Akachi, however, always noticed something peculiar. It wasn't just the perfection of her hair or her graceful posture. It was the silence that accompanied Ndidi as she worked on her hairstyles. No sound of combs or clicks of accessories, just the impeccable end result that appeared in the morning. As he watched Ndidi that night, separating her head from her body as if it were something banal, Akachi felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. The melody Ndidi sang seemed to have a hypnotic effect, filling the air with something that made your body want to move toward the sound, while your mind screamed to escape. The hairstyle she created, with glittering beads and braids that intertwined in complex patterns, seemed to take on a life of its own, almost as if Ndidi's hands were guided by an invisible force. The serenity in her eyes contrasted with the surrealism of the scene, and Akachi didn't know which was more disturbing, the image of her head separated from her body, or the calm with which Ndidi carried out each movement. As she put her head back in place, Ndidi closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if finishing a ritual. Akachi, now back in his bed, could barely breathe. His mind revolved around unanswered questions. Who was Ndidi, anyway? Was she human or something more? Akachi tried to remember every detail of that scene, from the sound of the melody to the precision with which the braids were formed. He felt as if he had invaded a forbidden secret, something that could have unpredictable consequences. But at the same time, curiosity burned within her, fueling a desire to discover more, even if it meant facing a fear she had never known before. As he lay there, reliving each moment, flashes of his childhood came to mind. He remembered the stories his grandmother told him about supernatural beings that lived among humans. Some were benevolent, while others carried curses that made them dangerous. Didi didn't seem to fit any of these descriptions. She was gentle, reserved, almost invisible in the boarding school routine, except for the attention that her impeccable hair attracted. Akachi tried to find logic in what he had seen, but the only thing clear was that it defied any rational explanation. The mystery was greater than she could understand, and at the same time, she knew she couldn't ignore what she had discovered. Dawn brought an unsettling sensation. Didi seemed to act as if nothing had happened, smiling calmly and chatting with the other students as usual. But for Akachi, Didi's every simple gesture now carried a different weight. It was as if she was watching a stranger who wore the familiar face of a roommate. The mystery of the night before still hung over her, but the courage that Akachi always had began to manifest itself. She needed answers, and she knew Ndidi was the only one who could provide them. However, how can you approach something so unusual without seeming crazy? And more importantly, would Ndidi be willing to talk? The day's routine seemed drawn out, each moment seeming longer than the last. Akachi watched Ndidi closely, looking for any clue that could reveal more about the secrets she was hiding. The questions in his mind were piling up. Was that an inherited ability, a gift, or a curse? Was Ndidi in danger, or was she in danger herself? As the day progressed, Akachi realized that the courage needed to confront Ndidi was not just about facing fear, but also about risking the friendship and trust they had built. Even with all the uncertainty, one thing was certain. Akachi could no longer ignore what he had witnessed. Something that night changed everything, and the weight of that secret grew with each moment. Looking at the mirror on his side of the room, Akachi saw his own reflection, but his mind was elsewhere. What did Ndidi see when she looked in the mirror? Was it her who created those perfect hairstyles, or something beyond her? Akachi knew that to find out, she would have to face the truth, even if that truth changed everything she believed she knew about the world and herself. The following hours would be decisive, and Akachi mentally prepared himself for what was to come. The next morning, Akachi woke up with a heavy body and a clouded mind. The poorly slept night, filled with confused thoughts and fragmented memories of what he had witnessed, seemed to have drained his strength. Still, the world around him continued its routine unabated. The students filled the hallway with laughter and carefree conversations, while the aroma of fresh porridge coming from the cafeteria mixed with the characteristic smell of damp morning leaves. Akachi felt a growing tension in his chest. Every little detail of that ordinary morning seemed to amplify the strangeness of the night before. When Ndidi appeared, Akachi's uneasiness increased. She was impeccable, as always. Ndidi's hair looked even more stunning, with a hairstyle so elaborate that it seemed impossible for human hands to achieve in such a short time. Akachi watched her carefully, looking for any trace of discomfort or indication that Ndidi also felt the weight of what had happened. But the young woman seemed calm, almost radiant. There was something about her smile that made Akachi feel vulnerable, as if Ndidi knew exactly what she had seen and was waiting for her to take the next step. Akachi's dilemma was immense. Confronting Ndidi meant running the risk of exposing something that perhaps should have remained secret. What if she was wrong? What if, somehow, your mind had fabricated all of that? On the other hand, the idea of keeping it to herself tormented her. What had happened that night seemed to transcend everything she knew, and Ndidi's silence only made the mystery more unbearable. Akachi spent the morning trying to avoid meeting Ndidi's eyes, but he felt the invisible weight of her presence at every moment. Finally, lunchtime arrived, and the two found themselves alone in the dormitory. Akachi knew he couldn't run away forever. His hands shook slightly as he made his bed, searching for courage that seemed to escape him. Finally, she turned to Ndidi, who was sitting on the small bench in front of the mirror, adjusting her earrings with the same delicacy that Akachi now associated with her movements the night before. "Ndidi," Akachi began hesitantly. Her voice sounded weaker than she intended, and Ndidi looked up, looking directly at her with an expression that mixed curiosity and expectation. "Yes," Ndidi replied, her tone calm but charged with something indefinable. Akachi felt his throat tighten. She knew she needed to continue. "What happened last night?" he asked, feeling the weight of his words as silence stretched between them. "I saw you. I saw your head." Akachi couldn't complete the sentence. The words seemed wrong, insufficient to describe what he had witnessed. Ndidi's expression immediately changed. His smile disappeared, and his face turned pale. His eyes, once confident, now showed surprise and deep fear. She lowered her hands slowly, as if any sudden movement could break something delicate in the air around her. "Akachi," Ndidi began, her voice shaking slightly. "You shouldn't have seen that." The phrase was simple, but it carried immense weight. Akachi felt a shiver run through his body, but he remained firm. "What are you?" she asked, her voice a little stronger now. Ndidi looked away, staring at the mirror in front of her as if searching for answers that weren't there. The silence that followed seemed endless, until Ndidi finally spoke again. "Please don't tell anyone," she begged, her eyes now filled with a vulnerability that Akachi had never seen before. "No one would believe it, and even if they did, it would only bring trouble for you and me." Akachi felt a wave of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to know everything. Who Ndidi was, where that supernatural gift came from, what it meant. On the other hand, the fear on Ndidi's face was real, and something in the sincerity of her voice made Akachi hesitate. She realized that, as frightening as the truth was, Ndidi was also a person who carried an immense burden, and that burden now seemed to be shared between the two of them. "I need to understand," Akachi said, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to emerge. "After what I saw, I can't just forget. Didi sighed deeply, as if she were carrying a weight that finally needed to be shared. But before she could say anything, footsteps echoed down the hall, and the voices of other students came closer. Didi stood up quickly, adjusting her uniform with precise movements. "Not now," she said in a whisper, looking at Akachi with a mix of urgency and regret. "Promise you'll wait. Promise you won't tell anyone." Akachi hesitated, but ended up nodding, even though every fiber of his being wanted to continue that conversation. The bedroom doors opened, and the normality of their routine returned like a wave, swallowing the tense moment between the two. Throughout the rest of the day, Akachi felt the weight of that promise like a stone in his chest. Didi continued to act as if nothing had happened, but the silence between them was now filled with unspoken secrets. Akachi knew that whatever was hidden inside Didi was something big, something she couldn't yet comprehend. But she also knew that somehow it involved her, and there was no going back. What had started as an innocent curiosity had now turned into a mystery that threatened to change everything around them. The silence between Akachi and Didi felt thick, almost palpable, as the empty dormitory became the stage for a conversation that would forever change Akachi's perception of the world. Didi hesitated for long seconds, as if each word she was about to say was a heavy stone being lifted from a turbulent river. Her eyes, normally serene, were now filled with a mixture of fear and tiredness, as if she was carrying the weight of a long-kept secret. "You need to understand," she began, her voice low, almost a whisper, "that what you saw is not something I chose, but something I am." Akachi didn't say anything, just waited. His curiosity was intense, but there was also an unspoken respect for what Didi seemed about to share. Didi took a deep breath before continuing. "I am part of a lineage called Ephemerala. We are women who are born with a gift or a curse, depending on how you look at it. This power allows us to manipulate our bodies in ways that people cannot understand. But there's always a price for that." She stopped, as if she needed to gather the strength to say the next words. "People are afraid of what they don't understand. They isolate us, persecute us, call us monsters. That's what happened to my mother." Her mother's name seemed to bring a wave of emotion that Ndidi could not completely contain. His eyes glazed over, and his voice shook as he continued. "My mother was also an Ephemerala. She tried to live among people, try to be accepted, but when they found out what she was, everything fell apart. What started as whispers of admiration soon became screams of fear and anger. I was little when everything happened, but I remember the sound of doors being kicked down, our house being invaded, and her telling me to run." Didi clasped her hands, as if trying to contain the memories that were coming to the surface. "She stayed behind to protect me, and I never saw her again." Akachi felt a lump in his throat as he listened. Didi's story was full of pain and loneliness, but there was also a stunning strength in her voice, a resilience that Akachi couldn't ignore. "So you live like this, hidden?" asked Akachi, his voice filled with empathy and confusion. Didi nodded slowly. "I have no choice. Showing who I really am is risking everything. I came to this boarding school because it's a place where I could hide. But now that you know..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of her words, it was clear. Knowing meant carrying the burden of a secret that could put them both in danger. Akachi's mind was racing. She wondered how anyone could live with such an immense secret, with such a painful past. And yet, Didi was there, handling it all with a grace and strength that Akachi could only admire. "Why did you tell me that?" Akachi asked, still trying to process everything. Didi smiled slightly, but it was a sad smile. "Because you saw it, there was no hiding it, and because, despite everything, I think I can trust you." That last sentence hit Akachi unexpectedly. Didi's trust was a gift, but also a responsibility that felt enormous. "I promise I won't tell anyone," Akachi said, and felt the sincerity in his own words. But at the same time, the curiosity to know more about the Ephemerala lineage grew within her, like a flame that could not be extinguished. "Is there more?" she asked hesitantly. Didi hesitated, as if deciding how far she could go. "There is much more, But some things are better left unsaid, at least for now. Despite the answers he had received, Akachi felt that the questions were even bigger. Who else knew about the Afomula? Were there others like Ndidi? And what did it mean to carry a gift that was at the same time a curse? The weight of Ndidi's secret now felt like his own. And even without fully realizing it, Akachi knew that his life would never be the same. Ndidi returned to her serene state, but her eyes still carried the shadow of someone who had lived longer than was allowed. Akachi watched as she got up and left the dorm, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The air seemed heavier, as if every word spoken in that conversation was still suspended in the space around it. As he looked at the door Ndidi had left through, Akachi felt he was on the brink of something much bigger than he could understand. Ndidi's story was not just a retelling of the past. It was a portal to an unknown world, full of mysteries and dangers that Akachi could not yet imagine. And for the first time, she realized that once she crossed that threshold, there was no turning back. Ndidi's revelation was just the beginning. The days that followed were filled with tension that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Akachi noticed the restless behavior of some students, whispers that increased in volume throughout the corridors, and curious looks thrown at Ndidi. Her colleagues' impeccable hairstyles, which were previously only admired, now raised questions. "How does she do this alone?" a student asked. "Have you ever seen her do her hair? It looks like magic," another replied. These murmurs did not take long to reach the attentive ears of Director Ikeen, a strict and meticulous woman, known for maintaining order at the boarding school at any cost. The atmosphere was heavy, and Akachi felt danger approaching like an inevitable storm. That night, when the students were already collected, Ndidi was called to the principal's office. Ikeen's firm and dry tone as he called her name echoed through the corridor, and Akachi felt his heart quicken. Something was wrong. She knew she couldn't ignore what was about to happen. Ndidi cast a quick glance at Akachi before leaving the room, a look that seemed to contain a silent warning, but also a plea for trust. Determined to protect her, Akachi waited a few moments and followed silently, his light footsteps echoing across the wooden floor of the dormitory. When he reached the office door, which was ajar, he heard Ikeen's deep voice on the other side. "Ndidi, you need to explain to me how you managed to create these hairstyles. The students are talking, and this is creating distractions. I do not tolerate mysteries that interfere with the discipline of boarding school." Ndidi's response was calm, but there was a note of concern in her voice. "I just like dressing up. I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary, Mrs. Ikeen." The director, however, did not seem convinced. "Don't treat me like a fool, girl. No one could do what you do without help. The others are starting to imagine things. If there's something you're hiding, it's best to speak up now." Outside, Akachi felt a chill run down his spine. She knew Ndidi was cornered and feared the truth might come out in a disastrous way. Inside the office, Ndidi was silent for a moment and then began to sing. The melody was familiar, the same one Akachi had heard that fateful night. It was mesmerizing, filling the space with otherworldly beauty. Ikeen seemed momentarily paralyzed, but something was wrong. The melody, which had previously flowed like a calm river, now had a dissonant note, something broken. The silence was abruptly interrupted by a shrill scream. A loud sound like thunder echoed through the boarding school, and Akachi, without thinking, pushed the door and entered. The scene before her was terrifying. Ndidi was standing, tears streaming down her face, while her head was once again separated from her body, floating above her hands as if caught in a movement of despair. Ikeen, in turn, was backed up against the wall, her eyes wide with pure terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. The office, once organized and austere, now seemed chaotic, with scattered papers and an almost tangible vibration of energy in the air. "Ndidi," Akachi shouted, running towards her friend. She felt the weight of the moment, as if she were stepping into forbidden territory. But her concern for Ndidi outweighed any fear. Ndidi tried to speak, but the melody that left her lips was no longer under control, as if she were trapped in a cycle of sound that she could not break. Akachi, not knowing what to do, held her hand tightly, his own voice shaking. "You need to stop. Ndidi, listen to me." At this moment, The melody began to weaken until it finally ceased. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Didi's head returned to its place with a gentle movement, but her face was pale, and she looked exhausted. Ikeen was still leaning against the wall, but now her eyes were fixed on Didi, filled with a mixture of horror and fascination. What are you?" the headmistress managed to mutter, her voice hoarse and hesitant. Didi did not respond. She just looked at Akachi, as if apologizing for involving her friend in that situation. Akachi, however, knew there was no turning back. Director Ikeen now knew that something extraordinary and incomprehensible was happening here, and Didi's secret was exposed in a way that could not be ignored. The room seemed to carry the weight of revelation, and Akachi felt that the course of their lives had just changed irreversibly. The only question that remained was what Ikeen would do with what he had witnessed. The office seemed suspended in time, the silence broken only by Director Ikeen's heavy breathing and Didi's suppressed sobs. Akachi knew he needed to act. She felt her heart race, but something greater than fear guided her. She placed herself between Didi and the director, raising her hand in an instinctive gesture of protection. "Please listen to me," she said, her voice firm even though her lips trembled. "She is not a monster. Didi is one of us. A young woman with dreams, fears, and hopes, just a special gift." His voice gained strength as he continued. "She never hurt anyone. What you saw is not something to fear, but something to understand." Ikeen, still leaning against the wall, seemed to be fighting her own emotions. The initial shock was beginning to give way to confusion and perhaps a small opening to understanding. His eyes, once wide with terror, now watched Ndidi with something Akachi couldn't decipher. "And how do you expect me to understand that?" asked the director, her voice hoarse, but without its usual harshness. "This goes beyond anything we know, and what happens when others find out? There's no way to control the rumors." Akachi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Ikeen's words. She knew the rumors had already started, but she also knew that if she didn't act now, the situation could become irreparable. "If people find out, it will be because we don't protect those who need to be protected," Akachi replied, staring at the director with a determination that she herself didn't know she possessed. "You always taught us that Zabani is a safe place, where we can be ourselves, where we are accepted for who we are. Didi is no different. She just wants to belong." His words seemed to find some echo in Ikeen's mind, who finally looked away, as if he was reflecting on the painful truth that Akachi presented. Meanwhile, Didi remained silent, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the table. She seemed smaller, vulnerable in a way Akachi had never seen before. Finally, she found her voice, weak but full of sincerity. "I never wanted anyone to know," she said, looking at Ikeen, "but I can't change who I am. All I want is to live in peace, like everyone else here." His words carried a pain that made Akachi feel a knot in his chest. She knew this moment was more than a confrontation. It was a plea for acceptance. The headmistress stepped forward, her rigid posture softened by a deep sigh. "I don't know how to deal with this," she admitted, her voice thick with honesty. "But I also can't ignore the impact of this on the boarding school. The students are already talking. I don't know how we can prevent this from becoming something bigger." Akachi felt the weight of Ikeen's doubt and realized that the situation was beyond either of their control. She turned to Ndidi, her eyes meeting her friend's. "Maybe it's time for you to decide what's best for you," she said, her voice low but full of empathy. Didi was silent for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then, with palpable sadness, she slowly shook her head. "I can't stay here," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not without putting everyone in danger. But I promise this won't be a final goodbye." His words carried a tone of farewell that made Akachi feel a sharp pain in his chest. She knew Ndidi was right, but that didn't make the match any less difficult. In the days that followed, rumors continued to spread. Some students began to look at Ndidi with renewed admiration, almost as if she were a mystical figure. Others, however, avoided her, their eyes full of fear and distrust. Ndidi, as always, handled all of this silently. but Akachi could see the weight it placed on her shoulders. When the day of his departure arrived, the dormitory was silent. Didi packed her few things and turned to Akachi with a sad smile. "You were more than a friend," she said, holding Akachi's hands. "You were my strength when I thought I had none left. Thank you for believing in me." Akachi held back tears as he responded, "You're not just a secret, Ndidi. You are a living reminder that different is not to be feared. I promise your story will not be forgotten." With those words, Ndidi was gone, walking out as Abani with her head held high despite her heavy heart. For Akachi, Ndidi's absence left a void, but also a determination to continue fighting for acceptance and understanding. Over time, Didi's story became a legend within the boarding school. Some students whispered about her as if she were a fairy tale, while others still saw her as a figure of mystery. But for Akachi, Didi would never be just a legend. She was a living reminder of courage, empathy, and the beauty that exists in differences. Akachi remained in Zabani, but knew that somewhere, Didi was living his truth, carrying with him the strength that was always inside her. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.